Okay, once again, I'm reading the fatf 40 recommendations, and I didn't realize how weird this is, but I'm in the interpretive notes, and I'm only less than a third of the way through this document. So I've already read all the fatf recommendations, so I don't know what's going to come after the interpretive notes, or if the interpretive notes are just like an explanation of absolutely everything in great detail, which makes actually a lot of sense too. So here I am on page 38. I know there's at least 60 pages, but beyond that, I'm not really sure. Identifying and designating persons and entities financing or supporting terrorist activity. The resolutions 1267 of 1999 and its successor resolutions designations relating to Al-Qaeda are made by the 1267 Committee, and designations pertaining to the Taliban and related threats to Afghanistan are made by the 1988 Committee, with both committees acting under the authority of Chapter 7 of the Charter of the United Nations. For Resolution 1373-2001, designations are made at the national and supranational level by a country or countries acting on their own motion or at the request of another country. If the country receiving the request is satisfied, according to the applicable legal principles, that a requested designation is supported by reasonable grounds or reasonable basis to suspect or believe that the proposed designee meets the criteria for designation in Resolution 1373 of 2001 and as set forth in Section E. 4. Countries need to have the authority and effective procedures and mechanisms to identify and initiate proposals for designations of persons and entities targeted by Resolutions 1267 of 1999 and its successor resolutions consistent with the obligations set out in the Security Council resolutions. Such authority and procedures or mechanisms are essential to propose persons and entities to the Security Council for designation in accordance with Security Council list-based programs pursuant to the Security Council resolutions. Countries also need to have the authority and effective procedures or mechanisms to identify and initiate designations of persons and entities pursuant to SRES 1373 of 2001, consistent with the obligations set out in that Security Council resolution. Such authority and procedures or mechanisms are essential to identifying persons and entities who meet the criteria identified in Resolution 1373 of 2001, described in Section E. A country's regime to implement Resolution 1267 of 1999 and its successor resolutions and Resolution 1373 of 2001 should include the following necessary elements. A. Countries should identify competent authority or report as having responsibility for I. Proposing to the 1267 Committee for designation as appropriate persons for or entities that meet the specific criteria for designation as set forth in Security Council Resolution 1989 of 2001 on Al-Qaeda and related resolutions if that authority decides to do so and believes that it has sufficient support to evidence to support the designation criteria. Proposing to the 1988 Committee for designation as appropriate persons or entities that meet the specific criteria for designation as set forth in Security Council Resolution 1988 of 2011 on the Taliban and those associated with the Taliban and constituting a threat to the peace, stability, and security of Afghanistan and related resolutions if that authority decides to do so, and believes that it has sufficient evidence to support the designation criteria, and 3. Designating persons or entities that meet the specific criteria for designation as set forth in Resolutions 1373 of 2001 as put forward either on the country's own motion or after examining and giving effect to, if appropriate, the request of another country. If the country receiving the request is satisfied, according to applicable legal principles, that a requested designation is supported by reasonable grounds or a reasonable basis to suspect or believe that the proposed designee meets the criteria for designation in Resolution 1373 of 2001 as set forth in Section E. B. Companies should have mechanisms for identifying targets for designation based on the designation criteria set out in Resolution 1988 of 2011 and Resolution 1989 of 2011 and related resolutions and Resolution 1373 of 2001. Alright, I get it. There wasn't stuff out about Al-Qaeda in 1988. That's just the resolution number that came out in 2011, which is a little after the game. Think about 9/11 happening in 2002. Whatever. See Section E for the specific designation criteria of relevant Security Council resolutions. This includes having authority and effective procedures or mechanisms to examine and give effect to, if appropriate, the actions initiated under the freezing mechanisms or other countries pursuant to Resolution 1373/2001 to ensure that effective cooperation is developed among countries. Countries should ensure that when receiving a request, they make a prompt determination whether they are satisfied, according to applicable supranational principles, that the request is supported by reasonable grounds or reasonable basis to suspect or believe that the proposed designee meets the criteria for designation in Resolution 1373 of 2011 as set forth in Section E. The competent authorities should have appropriate legal authorities and procedures for mechanisms to collect or solicit information as possible from all relevant sources to identify persons and entities that, based on reasonable grounds or reasonable basis, is suspected or believed to meet the criteria for designation in the relevant Security Council resolutions. D. When deciding whether or not to make a proposal for designation, countries should apply an evidentiary standard of proof of reasonable grounds or reasonable basis for designations under Resolution 1373 of 2001. Competent authority in each country will apply the legal standard of its own legal system regarding the kind and quantum of evidence for the determination that reasonable grounds or a reasonable basis exist for a decision to designate a person or entity and thus initiate an action under a freezing mechanism. This is the case irrespective of whether the proposed designation is being put forward on the relevant country's own motion or at the request of another country. Such proposals for designation should not be conditional upon the existence of criminal proceedings. E. When proposing names to the 1267 Committee for inclusion on the Al-Qaeda sanctions list pursuant to Resolution 1267 of 1999 and successor resolution, countries should I. Follow the procedures and standard forms for listing as adopted by the 1267 Committee, and to provide as much relevant information as possible on the proposed name, in particular sufficient identifying information to allow for the accurate and positive identification of individual group undertakings and entities, and to the extent possible the information required by Interpol to issue a special notice. Provide a statement of case which can, this is part 3, provide, I think is something that what institutions have to do. Such proposals for designation should not be conditional upon. When you're proposing a name that you think is affiliated with Al-Qaeda, provide a statement of case which contains as much detail as possible on the basis for the listing, including specific information supporting a determination that the person or entity meets the relevant criteria for designation. See Section E for the specific designation criteria of relevant Security Council resolutions. The nature of the information, supporting information, or documentation that can be provided. The details of any connection between the proposed designee and any currently designated person or entity. This statement of case should be releasable upon request for the parts of member state identified as being confidential to the 1267 Committee, and specify whether their status as designating state may be known. When proposing names to the 1988 Committee for Inclusion on the Taliban Sanctions List, pursuant to Resolution 1988 of 2011 and successor resolutions, countries should I. Follow the procedures for listing as adopted by the 1988 Committee. 2. Provide as much relevant information as possible on the proposed time, in particular sufficient identifying information to allow for the accurate positive identification of individuals, groups, undertakings, and entities, and to the extent possible, the information required by Interpol to issue a special notice, and provide a statement of case which contains as much detail as possible on the basis for the listing, including specific information supporting the determination of the person or entity meets the relevant designation, see Section E for specific designation criteria of relevant security solutions. The nature of the information, supporting information, or documents that can be provided, and details of any connection between the proposed designee and the currently designated person or entity. The statement of case should be releasable and upon request, except for the parts of the member state identified as being confidential to the 1988 Committee. That better? Okay. I'm repeating it because it's just the same thing from a different resolution. When requesting another country to give effect to the sanctions initiated under the freezing mechanisms that have been implemented pursuant to Resolution 1373 of 2001, an initiating country should provide as much detail as possible on the proposed name, in particular, sufficient identifying information to allow for the accurate and positive identification of persons and entities, and specific information supporting the determination that the person or entity meets the relevant criteria for designation. See Section E for the specific designation criteria of relevant security council. Each country should have procedures to be able to operate ex parte against a person or entity that has been identified when his proposal for designation is being considered. Subsection C. Freezing and prohibiting dealing in funds or other assets of designated persons and entities. There is an obligation for countries to implement targeted financial sanctions without delay against persons and entities designated by the 1267 Committee and the 1988 Committee in the case of Resolution 1267, Resolution 1999, and its successor resolution. When these committees are acting under the authority of Chapter 7 of the Charter of the United Nations, the Resolution 1373 of 2001, the obligation for countries to take freezing action and prohibit the dealing in funds or other assets of designated persons and entities without delay is triggered by a designation at the supranational level, but as put forward either on the country's own motion or at the request of another country. If the country receiving the request is satisfied, according to applicable legal principles, that a request designation is supported by reasonable grounds or a reasonable basis to suspect or believe that the proposed designee meets the criteria for designation in Resolution 1373 of 2001 is set forth in Section E. 6. Countries should establish the necessary legal authority and identify domestic competent authorities responsible for implementing and enforcing targeted financial sanctions in accordance with the following sanction procedures. A. Countries should require all natural and legal persons within the country to freeze without delay, without prior notice, the funds and other assets of designated persons and entities. This obligation should extend to all funds or other assets that are owned or controlled by the designated person or entity, and not just those that can be tied to a particular terrorist act, plot, or threat. Those funds or other assets that are wholly or jointly owned or controlled, directly or indirectly, by designated persons or entities, and the funds or other assets derived or generated from funds or other assets owned or controlled directly or indirectly by designated persons or entities, as well as funds or other assets of persons and entities acting on behalf of or at the direction of designated persons or entities. Countries should prohibit B. Their nationals or any persons or entities within their jurisdiction from making any funds or other assets, economic resources, or financial or other related services available directly or indirectly, wholly or jointly, for the benefit of designated persons or entities. owned or controlled directly or indirectly by designated persons or entities and entities acting on behalf of